Welcome to Dear Diaspora, a podcast celebrating the African diaspora and the changemakers, innovators, and entrepreneurs working to make our world a better one to live in. I'm your host, Ndulwa Kowa. Let's get started. So before I introduce the next guest, don't forget to leave a review, subscribe, and rate on Apple Podcasts. It makes a huge difference, and one key way that it does that is people are more likely to check out an episode or two if they see that there are ratings and if they see that people are actually listening to the content and enjoying the content. And one way to show that you enjoy the content is by leaving a review. So for everyone that's left a review, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And if you are listening on any other podcast listening platform, please make sure you follow the podcast so you're notified each Sunday when new episodes come out. And lastly, if you're listening on Spotify, you can actually share the podcast that you listen to on Instagram stories, just like you would a song. So if you're listening to Dear Diaspora on Spotify, you can share that in your Insta stories and I will repost. So of course, tag Dear Diaspora and I will repost, and really appreciate you spreading the word about the podcast. Happy Sunday, Dear Diaspora fam. Thank you so much for tuning in to episode 30 of the show. I hope that you are all well and remaining in good spirits despite everything that is going on. Please continue to stay home if you are not an essential worker. Adjusting to this new normal is certainly not easy, but I am so glad to see that we are all doing our part to help slow the spread of the coronavirus. And I wanted to make a quick shout out to all of the nurses, doctors, and medical professionals who are on the front lines and are putting their lives at risk to keep us all well and healthy. For today's episode, I was joined by Michael Addany. He is a Ghanaian PhD student currently in Wuhan, China. Yes, he is in the original epicenter of the coronavirus. And I had first heard Michael's story on the China Africa Project podcast and thought that he would make the perfect guest, and he really did. So during the episode, Michael shares what life was like for him and his fellow students under lockdown in Wuhan. He shares his thoughts about the Ghanaian government's decision not to evacuate the Ghanaian students that were studying in Wuhan. And he also shares a bit more about what Africa's response to the coronavirus could and should look like. I really enjoyed this conversation and learned so much from Michael. And so without further ado, here is my conversation with Michael Addany. Michael, thank you so much for being a guest on Dear Diaspora. I am so excited to have you on the show. So welcome.
Thank you very much. I also look forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. I want to start by getting to know you a little bit more before we kind of get more into everything that's been happening in China. So could you share a bit more about your background, where you're from, and what you're currently doing in China?
Okay, so I'm originally from Ghana in a city called Sunyani, where I work as a researcher in a public university there. So for the past 3 years, I've been in China as a doctoral researcher, writing on climate change adaptation law in the African Union. So I'm a student at Wuhan University, specifically Wuhan University, which is at the heart of the city. So that is what I'm doing currently.
Wow. Oh my goodness. So you are like at the epicenter of where just everything, that's where it originally broke out, correct? Coronavirus, I mean.
Yeah, the original epicenter, but as the WHO said, the epicenter have now shifted to Europe, and gradually US is becoming the epicenter. That is how interdependent the world is.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay. So you're at the original epicenter. So I guess we can get right into it. So could you kind of walk us through when things kind of first started to get really bad? Like, I know, like, it broke out in late December, correct?
Yeah, December. Somewhere around Christmas, there was rumors or speculation that there was an outbreak, a pneumonia outbreak. So we were told to take care of ourselves, avoid crowded places and all that. But we thought it wasn't that serious, and it was concentrated at a place called Hanko. So Wuhan is made up of three cities: Wuchan, Hanko, and Haiyan. So these three cities come together to form Wuhan city. So the outbreak started from a place called Hanko. So we thought it was very far from us. We kept hearing it in the news. But on 23rd, things became very bad. So at around 2 a.m., we heard the news that public transportation is going to be shut down at 10 a.m. and the city is going to be on a partial lockdown where we are not allowed to go to crowded places. We have to stay indoors, practice social distancing, ventilate our rooms, and all that. Then the following week, there was a full blown shutdown where you are not allowed to step out of your house unless it's medical emergency. So those living in complexes, only one person is allowed in the entire house to step out every 3 days. So you put your resources together for the person to go and shop for you. And if none of the people is having a car, then the government made arrangement for a volunteer, a community volunteer who belongs to the ruling party, to take your list of items and then they go and buy for you. So since then, I
Wow.
think we've been indoors. There's no way you can go out unless you are sick. I mean, positive case, then you can't go out. So that has been the case for the past 9 weeks now, because today is the 71st day since we were locked down or we were locked in or told to stay in our houses.
Wow. Oh my goodness. And so I think it's just interesting to think of how quickly or how rapidly the Chinese government responded, and how, like, early on they recognized that this could get really bad, and they like took action like quite swiftly. What is your take on like their response? Like, do you think they did a great job, or did they wait too long? Should the lockdown have started earlier, or what are your thoughts on that?
No, I think just like the US and other countries, or even the World Health Organization, how they responded. People underestimated the virus. People
Mm.
underestimated the virus. They thought they could deal with it quickly and it would be out of the picture. So the Chinese government, I think, was trying to know more about the virus. Like the name suggests, it is novel, so it's something new, and it kept evolving. So at a point where they thought it was escalating, that was when they came in a more comprehensive manner to control the spread. So in the beginning, we realized that the lockdown was a bit more progressive, which helped us to also adjust along the way. Like in the beginning, it was like, don't go out, avoid crowded places. Then they said, stay in your home. Nobody can go out unless it's a medical emergency. So it was a bit gradual until 8th February when Wuhan was declared as a code red zone, as in a highly contagious environment. So now we were all locked in our houses, basically like a house arrest. So I would say that possibly the Chinese government made some mistakes, but they always quickly move in to address those mistakes, which is quite expected. Like other countries, my country, we have about 200 cases. The government makes mistakes and they correct it. It's like learning by doing, sort of. But at the
Mm.
end of the day, I think they've achieved the results they wanted. And the Chinese approach was comprehensive. They went all out. And I think all countries can learn from the Chinese approach. Countries like Singapore and South Korea, they also did well, but we all understand that the number of infections in China were quite high than South Korea or Singapore. So if they had more cases like China, maybe they will still be grappling with the outbreak. So I think the Chinese government did well. They moved in at the right time. They moved in at the right time. Just like all of us, we underestimated the virus. Personally, the international student here, we were making jokes of the virus. We thought it was very far from us and all those kind of stuff. But all this changed in the second week when we realized that people we knew were being infected. And sometimes we call our Chinese friend and they tell us, "Oh, I've lost my father, I've lost my sister, I've lost my brother to the
Wow.
virus." Then we were all put in a panic mode. We started panicking. So now we accepted our situation. And when we started rather praising some of the measures the Chinese government was putting in place, because we realize now the Chinese government is interested in protecting our lives because this whole thing is real and we don't have to underestimate it. Yeah, so I think other countries will gradually realize that. They'll realize that this thing is real. I mean, US, Italy, Spain, European countries now they know, but still Africa, most people think this thing is very far from them. They've not come to that point of accepting the virus, how intense and severe it is. So they still, some of them are challenging some of the measures their government are putting in place. We were there 10 weeks ago, and now we appreciate the measures the government put in place.
Wow, that is so interesting. To the official lockdown, I know they were saying, like, avoid crowds and that sort of thing, but were people still kind of out and about, kind of ignoring it, would you say? Because that's something that I've noticed here. Even like in Kansas City, like I went out over this past weekend to grab groceries, and I live super close to a museum, and like I drove past the museum and it was packed. Like there were so many people outside walking around, just hanging out, and I was like, do people not understand what's going on? And I was seriously shocked. I feel like I saw more people there this weekend than I do just on normal weekends. And so that's like a bit concerning. So would you say that was similar in China? Like were people still kind of out and about before February 8th?
No. So one thing I've learned about the Chinese people is that they are really law abiding. They are really law abiding people. When the government says something, some may not agree, but they will abide. They will
Okay.
abide. Yeah, so once they said we should stay home and only go out when it is necessary, the street were deserted. Everybody was in their homes. You don't even hear a siren. You don't hear cars. You don't see anything. Everybody was in their homes. So, or even when you're going to the supermarket, you don't see people on the road. When you get to the supermarket, you see few people, and I mean, we give each other space, not even social distancing, proper distance. Yeah, because we saw every person as a potential um, yeah, potential confirmed case or potential infected person. So now on the 8th, when the government there was a full blown lockdown, nobody was on. I mean, nobody was outside because we can't go out. Only the police and few people were allowed out for distribution of basic necessities like food and all that. Yeah, and supermarkets were all closed. They all resorted to online marketing and those things. Yeah, so the Chinese people are really law abiding. They're really, really law abiding. So I think that helped us. That helped us. And I think that third week, people now began appreciating the measures the government has put in place. So some of us, the criticisms we had in the beginning now turn to sympathy because especially the community volunteers who were government officials from different departments who were now grouped in to assist communities in adapting to the lockdown, like going to warehouses, putting food and other necessities together to distribute to houses. They were most of them were getting infected, including doctors and all those things. So we realized that people are really risking their lives for us. So we started rather appreciating the measures that the government had put in place.
Man, so how do you think that's gonna, how is it gonna play out, you think, in like on the continent? Like, I mean, would you say people back home are more law abiding? And like, if the government, puts something out, like they're actually gonna listen?
Like, no, in Africa, I think the problem we have, first of all, is trying to build trust between our government and the people. Here, the Chinese government made the people realize that they are doing things because to protect the interest and the welfare and the well-being of the people. So now people started complying, and the government backed it by effort, action, putting in place mechanisms to make sure they always have access to food, water, all those things. And even the people who could not afford, the government made sure they get free food and all those kind of stuff. So now in Africa, the challenge is most of our people works in the informal sector. So if you're going to tell them to shut down their businesses, how do the daily wage workers survive? Because you've ended their source of livelihood. So unless the government comes in or intervene through social protection measures like cash transfer or supplying basic necessities like food, um, hand sanitizers, toiletries, and other cosmetics and all those things that people will need, it becomes very difficult. Otherwise, the people are going to be um, like their vulnerability will be increased. It will be like a triple punishment because already the people are fighting poverty, and now you further marginalize them, and they have to also protect themselves from the virus. So I think our government will have to develop something that fit our contextual realities in order not to indirectly punish our people for no fault of theirs. But I would say our people are law abiding once they understand that the government have their interests at heart. It will become easy for them to comply with the lockdown regulations or orders.
Wow, thank you for that. I totally agree, and I would say the scary thing is like for citizens who historically have believed that their governments don't have their best interest at heart. Like, what's gonna all of a sudden make them listen? You know?
Yeah, I think what will happen is that ultimately people will obey these orders not because they respect the authority of the government, but they will do so because they want to protect their lives and those of their loved ones, and like the lives of their loved ones. Because like here, we realized that most of us wanted to go home in the beginning. We wanted our government to evacuate us. I personally didn't want to go, but I'm a leader here. Majority of our people wanted to go, so I have to talk to radio stations and all that to make our government listen. But at the end of the day, when we realized our government were not coming to get us, we changed the narrative from educating our people here that now our lives are in our own hands. We need to comply to the orders. We need to take very good care of ourselves so that none of us is infected because we are vulnerable in this city. We don't speak the language. We don't have social support and other vulnerabilities. So we have to really be there for one another. So at the end of the day, like people in the slums, people living on the street, people living in compound houses in the villages, they will realize that they are all that they've got. So they have to rather take care of themselves. So they will be practicing social distancing. And the interesting thing is that most of these people even are very hygienic, despite wherever they are living. They know how to wash their hands, they know how to social distance and all. So they will do things to protect their lives and the lives of their loved ones. They will be there for each other, sharing the little that they have because they have to. They are not because of what the government is saying. We know this true in most African countries where the president are authoritarian, the high level of corruption. The health sectors are understaffed. They are, I mean, poor healthcare systems because when they are sick, they travel to other countries and all that. Yeah, so these people know that even if they get the virus, their chances of survival is very slim or low. So they have to do everything they can. But at the beginning, people will be rushing to the market to stock. Yeah, they'll be rushing to the market to stock. So it is going to be very difficult to tell them to completely sit at home in the beginning. Yeah, it will take a week or so for them to adjust. So now we have to watch how things evolve over there in Africa.
Man, oh my goodness. Yeah, I mean, lots to unpack there, I would say. So, if, let's say, let's pick like Ghana because you're from there. If the Ghanaian government said, everyone stay at home, everything's closed, how capable or how well equipped is the Ghanaian government to, let's say, disperse those cash transfers that you suggested would be like a potential solution? Like, is that even something that's realistic for a lot, maybe for Ghana and maybe other African countries?
Yeah, I'll start by saying that we are capable of doing that. Where there is a will, there is a way. Our government, our president recently said that when people lose their livelihood through the lockdown, it can be restored. But when somebody die through the virus, we cannot restore their lives. So this is the time that we have to focus on the short-term needs, protecting lives, making sure that all the resources our health sector needs are provided, even if we have to recruit more doctors and nurses who are sitting home because they were not employed after graduation. We have to make sure we cut down on physical infrastructure funding and all that to transfer these monies to the social sector to cater for the needs and welfare and well-being of our people. So now what we have to do is to focus on, in the short term, making sure that there is enough food. Our electricity is working. I mean, water is flowing and all those things. Then in the medium term, like in this perspective, like 5 months, if this should continue for 5 months, 6 months, will we get enough food for the people? So we have to boost our agricultural sector so that our farmers will be able to provide food because most seasonal crops in Africa takes like 3 or 4 months to um the cycle is 3 to 4 months, like maize, corn, all those things. Yeah, because what is going to happen now is most countries are closing their borders. I mean, cargo will be flowing, but people or certain countries are going to be selfish. They're going to rather focus on how they can provide for their citizens. They'll only give you their surplus. So if this thing should happen for like 6 months to 1 year, Africa is really going to suffer because most African countries import about 70% of their pharmaceutical product from elsewhere. And most of them import about 50% of their food product or food items, food supplies from Asia, from Europe, US, and Brazil. So if we are not able to fill this gap, how do you expect people to cope when they don't have food, when they don't have basic necessities, water is not running, all that? It's going to be difficult. But if the government really want to cash transfer, they can. These stimulus packages, they can. Because already our government, for instance, is building a national cathedral, which is going to cost about 100 million US dollars, a cathedral.
Wow.
Yeah, so all these are not really urgent needs. Recently, our government is said they are going to build a dam, which is going to cost almost 1 billion USD. Some of these projects can be placed on hold, and then we use this money in the field sectors that are really vital in protecting our people against this virus. When we get out of this, we can re-engineer our programs. Yeah, because when there is life, there is hope. Yeah, so it's a matter of reprioritizing um, our needs or our development project to
For
put
sure.
people first. Yeah, I can say that the Chinese government, despite the criticism people are leveling against the Chinese government, Wuhan is a vibrant city, it's an industrial city, auto manufacturing and all that. The decision to shut Wuhan was something that the government did by placing humanity ahead of profitability. They knew the
Wow.
economic impact, but then they put the lives of the people first. And we've been on lockdown for 71 days. The Chinese economy has really suffered and is still suffering. But then they know that when they are through this, they are going to be more resilient. And the confidence that the people have in their government is going to be enhanced. And they will be able to rebuild their economy. So it's something African government can also learn from. That we have to prioritize saving the lives of our people. It's a time that they should try to win the trust of the people, that the people will believe in their government, that the government have our interest at heart. We receive this and that money from our government. Our government sent us $500 each. Each Ghanaian student in Wuhan got $500. And we also received food items. And we were 350 people. And some of the people even were crying when they received the money. They never believed that it will come, a time will come that our government will directly transfer $500 to them. So it renewed the bond, even though we were not evacuated. But the social bond between us and our government was strengthened because they indicated to us that they care for us. So if they do similar things back home, trust me, people will have trust and a sense of renewed hope in their government.
Absolutely. Wow. Oh my gosh. I love what you said about humanity over profitability. I think that's something that I'm sure, I don't know if you've been following like the US updates and things, but like our president, like time and time again, he constantly keeps saying, "Oh, we just can't shut down America," like we just can't do that. And it doesn't seem like it comes from a place of it seems like it comes from a place of we don't want our economy to tank, you know. And so we're going to try and keep things as open or we're going to try and keep things open for as long as we can. I don't get a sense that he's thinking or the government's thinking like, humanity over profitability. Like that's not what we're getting over on this side. But maybe it's just the president and, the government as a whole
Yeah.
is, thinking differently. But yeah, our president is just something else.
Yeah, that is true. But I believe that the other institutions or the state they will step in to fill the gap that the decisions of the president is leaving. They'll step in to fill it. They'll step up to the plate, whereby they'll be interested. If you look at what is happening in New York and other places, they'll step in to take care of the most vulnerable people by coming out with some social interventions. Because capitalism without a very vibrant social outlet whereby you can take care of the most vulnerable in society will lead to anarchy because it will become like a government of few people. Yeah, and that is something US should try to avoid because whether we like it or not, they are a global leader, and most countries are looking up to what US is doing. So once US begins to set a bad example, then other African countries, especially who do not even want to act, will be using US as an example. That even US couldn't do this. How do you expect me to do that? Yeah. So this time that US should rather provide leadership at the international level and also at the local, state, and yeah, national level.
Man, that is so powerful. You know, we are certainly like a global leader and influencer, and sometimes I just think to myself like, oh my gosh, like people are watching, and until recently, Trump had a very just alarming or concerning tone towards everything that's happening. But I would say recently he's probably getting a little bit better, and a little bit more just realistic, and his leadership is I, I don't want to say it's getting better, but it's like I'm starting to get a sense that he has a better understanding of how this is really going to impact us, and the fact that we need to act as quickly as possible. Wow. And so, for those who don't know much about Wuhan and like how many African students are there, could you share a bit more about like how many African students are studying in Wuhan?
Okay, thank you very much. So Wuhan, I think, is the number one city in the world with the largest number of universities. We have over 100 universities in Wuhan,
Whoa.
meaning it's an international or global educational hub. So we have about 6,000 African students in the Hubei Province, and we have about 4,600 African students in Wuhan city. And the numbers, I think we have about 500 Ethiopians, about 450 students from Tanzania, and about 350 students from Ghana, and 320 students from Zimbabwe. I think there are about 200 students from South Africa in that order. Yeah, so there are a lot of African students here, close to 5,000, which is around 4,600.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot of students, and I know a lot of like the some of the North African countries were able to like get their students to like return back home, right?
Yes,
And so,
almost all North Africans.
almost all North Africans. Okay, and why do you think they were like in a better position, or do you think that was even the right decision? Now that you've like experienced everything.
No, at that particular point in time, that was the right decision to do because they evacuated their student 2 weeks within 2 weeks of the lockdown. And at that
Ah,
point, if you realize, most countries thought it would be a Chinese thing. Everything is going to end in China. So most countries didn't prepare. They were watching China to contain it. So the evacuation was a matter of rescuing or airlifting your citizens from a place of danger to a place of safety. Because African students here were particularly vulnerable. And at that point, most of the people here had not been infected. That is why, up to now, all the 10 African countries that evacuated their students, none of the evacuees tested positive to the virus. So
wow.
they've been saved from all this mental anguish and emotional and panic attacks and all those things. Because what we have been through for the past, what we have been through for the past, sorry about that. What we have been through for the past 10 weeks, the effect or the damage may be irreparable.
And
Because,
oh, sorry. Go
yeah,
ahead.
so I think that what they did was the right decision. Most of us started questioning the relationship between us and our government as to whether they really care about their citizens or not. But now that the virus is in our countries, the conversation is changing. Is we don't judge our government's decision, but we are occupied or preoccupied with how we can help our countries to deal with the virus, especially based on us sharing our experiences. That panic won't help. It's better you be careful and not fearful. Listen to what the health experts are saying on all those things. So we don't really want to resurrect that conversation as to whether our government were right or not. Because the reason why they didn't come for us was not really because they cared about us, but it was because they were risking our lives to protect the lives of our people back home, which is quite understandable because we know the healthcare system there. So if there was a they possibly imported the virus, then they were going to struggle in dealing with it. That was the decision our government, for instance, gave, that they were not prepared and they are
Mm,
afraid of importing the virus. So now what we think is that the decision they made rather worked to our benefit without them knowing it. But that is not what we are focused on right now. We really want our country not to go through this. We don't want them to go through what we went through here or what is happening in Europe or elsewhere. So we just want to help our government in whatever way that we can to confront this virus in a more united way. So we want to focus on a collective response without any division.
mm. Absolutely. And you mentioned that, some of the students that got to leave earlier, you know, didn't really have to experience some of the trauma that you guys have, you know, gone through being on lockdown for 71 days. What I don't want to make you like relive your trauma because I know you're almost at the end, but for those that may not be familiar, like what was your living situation like?
Yeah, so basically you are alone in your room 24/7. The only time you are allowed to go out is when it's time for breakfast 7:30 or 12 midday you go for lunch and 6 p.m. you go for dinner. After you come back to your room. So it's basically like a prison kind of thing. You don't have the chance to go anywhere. So this affected most of us because this was the first time we were really living alone with minimal human contact. So there
Mm.
were situations whereby I think about the second week or so, we saw a lady running around naked and they have to run after her. And another incident happened also uh, involving a lady who was just talking, like a mental illness. And there was a guy who also wanted to commit suicide and all those kind of stuff. So people have really gone through that. There are times you'll be talking to somebody on the phone and they start crying. I mean, somebody in their 40s or mid 30s. Yeah, so it got to that point. It got to that point. But we adapted eventually. We adapted that life here and the lockdown has become like the new normal
Mm.
because we realize we have to do what we have to do. I'm writing my doctoral thesis. I have to defend in May. I have to submit by 20th April. So
Wow.
1 month into the lockdown, I realized no, I'm graduating in June, so I have to tune my mind and do what I'm supposed to do, and the other people like me. So we have to force ourselves to really work to make sure we don't stay here forever or after June. Yeah, so life has been very challenging, but through the support of our relatives back home and good people like you who keep sharing inspiring messages, we were able to adapt. And now the end is in sight.
Man. Oh my goodness. I mean, I am so glad things are slowly, hopefully, going to get back to normal in the next couple of weeks for you guys. Because, yeah, you've certainly been through it. Um, yeah, I could not imagine being in your situation. Because, like, a lockdown for you guys was like an actual lockdown. We,
The actual lockdown.
because I keep seeing jokes about it, like we just haven't seen this many people like hanging out outside, taking walks, going to the park. Like before all this started happening, like parks would be kind of empty, but now it's like you look outside and everyone's on a run, everyone's on a jog,
Oh,
everyone's out with their dog, everyone's going out to go read in the park. So it's just like I mean it's nice to see that people are spending time outdoors, but then it's like people are still congregating, you know and
yeah.
really they're not social distancing at all. So that's a little concerning. But wow, yeah, I mean thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, definitely glad that things are going to get back to normal for you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, goodness. And so could you share a bit more about your, like you're a doctoral researcher? Could you share a bit more about like what your, is it like your thesis or, what you're working on?
Yeah, so I'm researching on climate change adaptation law and human rights in the in the African Union. So it is generally there is a general debate there is general consensus that climate change affects the realization of human rights, like right to life, right to health, right to healthy environment, even right to water, right to food, and all that. And Africa is the most vulnerable continent to the impact of climate change. So there is increased extreme weather events like tsunamis, like hurricanes, like cyclones, flood, perennial flooding. People are dying, properties are being damaged. So I'm trying to look at how we can use human rights norms and procedures like human rights tribunals and court to assess justice to the most vulnerable people to the impact of climate change in Africa, like like refugees, indigenous people, coastal dwellers, the urban poor, rural poor. How can they assess justice when their rights are violated by responses to climate change, or their rights are undermined by the impact of climate change? Because human rights law obliges states to take positive measures to protect the rights of people. So even if climate change, because of climate change, there's drought, that is not an excuse for government not to provide water to their citizens. So the government are supposed to take positive measures to make sure people have access to adequate, quality, and accessible water, and that people also have access to adequate housing. So even if there is flooding, the government should move in swiftly to relocate the people to a temporary place and rebuild their houses for them. We understand the resources are not there in Africa, but human rights law says that they have to take progressive steps with all the resources available to them to make sure that the rights of the vulnerable people are guaranteed. So that is what I'm researching on. It's quite challenging because these two fields of law are different. So there's a lot of debate and argument to make. So that is what I'm working on, and I'm almost there.
Wow. Oh my gosh. And so what happens when you said you have to defend it, right? Pretty soon?
Yeah, my pre-defense is next week, and the final defense is somewhere 22nd May.
Wow. And then what happens after that? Like you publish
I'll
it
go.
or
Yeah, I'll publish it as a book.
nice. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh. Yeah, you're going to have to well hopefully you share that out on all of your like LinkedIn and social media so we can repost and things like
sure,
that.
sure. I hope to stay in touch with you, so I'll be sharing bits and bits of my life after Wuhan with you from time to time.
Man, seriously. Oh, yeah. I mean, all the best with that. That's really, yeah, really exciting. So
Thank you so much. Mhm.
you mentioned that Africa's the most vulnerable, like when it comes to climate change. Like, why is a continent the most vulnerable?
So the first one is about geography. The first one is geography, where we are located. Yeah, so like the Sahara Desert, for instance, keeps expanding, and we have the tropical forest, all those. So now climate change is going to make existing vulnerabilities worse. Is a stress multiplier. So now what is going to happen is that rivers are going to dry up, and where initially there were no rivers, or where initially rainfall was low, now is going to be on the increase. So there's going to be flooding all of a sudden. For instance, in East Africa, it is predicted that there's going to be a lot of rainfall, but somewhere in West Africa and Southern Africa, rainfall is going to decrease. So there's a shifting. So now the serious issue in South Africa is access to water. Is a big issue. Cape Town was nearly declared day zero because they were not getting water. So now that is one of it. And the other thing is the existing vulnerabilities like poor infrastructure or inadequate infrastructure, high levels of poverty, rain dependent agriculture. Rainfall is going to reduce massively. So people or farmers relying on rainfall, they are going to suffer. For instance, my grandparents who are cocoa farmers, they used to have 2 seasons in a year, the major season and then the minor season. But now they have only 1 season. And that 1 season is not even, they are not able to get enough produce like they used to even get during the minor season. So their income is heavily affected. That is the effect of climate change. And now, typical example is what happened in 2018 in Philippines and in Hong Kong and China. There was this typhoon that happened. It killed thousands of people in the Philippines because of low infrastructure. But when it came to Guangzhou and Hong Kong, nobody died. No building even collapsed because they have advanced infrastructure. The same thing happens in Africa and it kills people. Like flood flooding kills almost 100 people every year in June in Accra. It kills people who happen in Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi last year. So all these are extreme weather events. And because we have low infrastructure facilities or weak infrastructure, when it happens, it kills a lot of people. It destroys a lot of properties. So all these things weakens our adaptive capacity, as in our ability to cope. We are not resilient to the impact of climate change. And for us to adapt, we need to really invest in priority sectors. We need to modernize our agriculture. We need to industrialize. We need to build and maintain infrastructure. We need to change our housing. We need to build houses that are climate smart or climate resilient. So all these things make the African continent very vulnerable because we are the most underdeveloped continent. And climate change affects the poor the earliest and the hardest. So the undeveloped regions are always the first to be hit by extreme weather event. And it hits them the hardest. So
Man.
climate change is an existential something when it comes to Africa. It can wipe us one time.
Man, oh my goodness. I mean, that's definitely scary to think about. And I would say, like, from what I've observed, like governments seem to understand the need to like improve our infrastructure, but it's like everything's moving so slowly, probably because of lack of money and resources. But like, how do you like accelerate infrastructure development if possible?
No, I think the will is not there. The reality is that most of our government are hijacked by foreign forces. We are not really independent. So they are interested in serving the interest of their neo-colonial masters, not the interest of their people. Because if we really want to develop, we need to, whether we like it or not, adapt a little bit of the Chinese way, where they closed up, modernized the agriculture, they industrialized, they sent their people on scholarship to the US, Australia, Europe to go and acquire skill. When they come, they put them in the industries that they were building. So they started building their own ships. Now the Chinese are building their own airplanes. They build their own infrastructure. So when we do that, now we add value to our value. We add value to our existing chain, like supply chain. So our agriculture now is going to create jobs for people because when we produce the cocoa, we are able to use the cocoa bean to make our own chocolate and other products, the cream. The industries are going to employ people. Even the haulage drivers are going to be employed. The packaging people are going to be employed. So now that's how we create jobs for the people. But now what that then we'll be able to expand our economy, generate money, and invest in our priority sectors like the infrastructure and all those kind of stuff. But right now, what is happening is we export raw materials. The West and China, they add value to it. So if you earn 1 billion from exporting, they add value to it. Now you need 3 billion to go and buy it. That is what is happening right now. So we need to be like the Chinese people. We need to start making our own cars. I mean, Africans are smart. Why don't we come out with um, scholarships to send our people to China, Japan, South Korea, US, Germany, Technical University of Munich, and all that to go and learn these engineering programs, so that when they come, now they come and start producing cars. Then we come out with policies for companies and individuals to buy these cars. That is what the Chinese government is doing. When you go to Chinese supermarkets, all you see is Chinese product. There are only few foreign supermarkets like Walmart and Carrefour. When you go, you see a lot of Chinese products, so but there are only few Western products, and they are super expensive. So if it is chocolate and you see an American chocolate, you see a Chinese chocolate that looks just like it. And the American chocolate may cost like $30. The Chinese chocolate costs like $10.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they understand that their companies cannot compete with the well-established American companies when it comes to scale. So they have to cushion them. They have to level the grounds for them. These are some of the things Africans can do to create jobs. When we create jobs, we industrialize, we will expand our economies, and now we have the money to invest in our infrastructure. And if our local contractors are going to be building our roads, it's going to be cheap. It's going to be cheap. We are going to pay them with local money, so it will even stabilize our currencies. Now we bring contractors from outside, we have to pay them in dollars, so there's always pressure when it comes to foreign exchange reserves. So our currencies are always depreciating. And also, when we are negotiating with China, we negotiate with Chinese and Americans from a position of vulnerability. We don't understand basic economics because they are now all capitalist economies, including China. So when they have that money, they have to get it out of their system, else it will collapse their system. So they need us to give us loan. If you don't take the money, they will have to invest it in non-productive sectors like the military. So when we are negotiating with them for money, it shouldn't be like we need your money at all costs. We can use Libya and other countries as an example. When they sanction them, they develop from within and they become self-reliant. So that is what I think. I know you have a lot to say on that. So I'm also I'm also listening.
Wow. I mean, yeah, I mean everything that you said, I completely agree. Especially like with our agricultural sector. Like I know it employs like currently I think is it 70% of
Yeah,
our
70% in most countries.
our population. So it's like that is like that's like the
The
perfect
backbone.
opportunity, yeah, to figure out how we can modernize and just make our sectors just more efficient, really. So it's just interesting to think that you know 70% of our folks work in that sector, but it's like I'm not really seeing too much innovation happening in that sector. Like it seems like we're still, like majority of people are still, subsistence farmers, and people aren't really able to scale in any sort of significant way. Like we still have like a lot of small scale farmers. So, I mean, in your opinion, like I really like what you had to say about figuring out ways to like basically find, like our top talent, send them around the world to learn and then come back. From like our government's perspectives, do you think they would push back and say like, oh, we are already doing that? Because I mean, there are a lot of students that are, around the world learning. Or is that really not what you meant?
No, that is not what I meant.
Okay.
We should be a bit we should be more intentional because
Okay.
like I am here on the Chinese government scholarship, and we all know that even though they are doing this for us for free, they also have an intention. I mean, the UK, Germany, Japan, Australia, they all have scholarships, and African students are bright, so they keep winning them. But when they go there, now they learn to be sympathetic to the priorities of those countries. Like I have studied in China, now I understand them more better. So most of the criticisms leveled against China, now I realize they were not true. So I am more inclined to thinking in a way that serves Chinese interest more than the American interest. The
Mm.
same happens to other Africans who go to study in these countries. Indirectly, they indoctrinate them. And when they also graduate and go back home, the government has no plan for them.
Mm.
So there are a lot of people back home who are unemployed. There are more than 5,000 doctors in Ghana who are unemployed, medical doctors. There are over
Wow.
28,000 unemployed nurses in Ghana. There are about 350,000 unemployed graduates in Ghana. It's becoming a ticking bomb. And this is worse in other African countries. So we have untapped skilled labor. So what I am saying is that the government, this thing should be well coordinated. That we know, we as a country, we know that we need this number of engineers, we need this number of doctors, we need this number of pharmacists, we need this number of biomedical scientists and all that, and we create jobs for them. If we are not going to create state jobs because we have a poor reputation for that, we come out with packages for the private sector to be able to absorb these people. So we build industries to process cocoa. We build industries, petrochemical industries, to process our crude oil because there are about 120 products from crude oil alone. But now these countries buy our crude oil in its crude form. That's what we call crude oil. And now they process into petrol, into diesel, into kerosene, into all those kind of stuff. And now we buy them back. So we should be
Mm.
targeted in our approach so that when these people go out there to get the skill, they will come back to Ghana. Most people in China here will find job here and work, or they will go to other countries because when they go back home, they will not find job.
And that's the most frustrating thing. It's like we have so many qualified, educated young people. But yeah, when they go back, or even if they, graduate from like a university in their country, it's like, job prospects are quite low. So that's definitely disappointing. But I agree that we, or African governments, need to be just more intentional about it. Because, yeah, I don't think there's any sort of concrete strategy at the moment where it's like, oh, we're sending this group of students to this country for this specific reason because we want them to learn this, and that and return and then, start on this project. Like I'm not seeing examples of that really. But hey, I mean, maybe that's something that you can bring up or implement in some way. You could be that person to be like, hey, like, how about we start, this program? Because I feel
Yeah, sure.
like,
It's something I've been thinking about. So I would have to talk that out with you.
I mean, yes, I would love to hear more about it or talk more about it. Because because it's like people are already, studying, people are already seeking like higher education. But it's like, what's the incentive to like really go back home if, when you return, there's no guarantee that you're actually going to find a job. Yeah, I mean, we could certainly benefit from a program like that, I would say. Yeah, just being more intentional, like you said, because you can't just hope that people come back with ideas. Like, and I'm sure people do come back with ideas, but it's like, where do they go
Exactly.
if they want to, like, get started with them? So, wow, man, that is super interesting. But I definitely agree that we need to just take ownership of all of this and figure out ways we can start producing our own cars, like you mentioned. Just taking ownership of like different parts of the supply chain. Like that's super important because we can't continue to just be suppliers of like raw materials and then that's it.
I think it's a conversation we need to keep going, and I would like to discuss it more in detail with you whenever you are free, because I think we should own our development, and wherever you are, once you're from Africa, you're an African. Yeah, so we need to drive our own development by, first of all, networking. That is why I was very happy when you invited me for this talk, because it's also an opportunity for me to know somebody who really think about Africa and want to see Africa develop or succeed. Yeah, so I think we are networking. This is how our
Yes.
independent fighters, how they networked from various corners of the earth, and they were able to fight and gain independence. And I think now we need to focus on fighting to gain economic independence. So we need to keep the conversation going and strengthen our friendship or our bonds to make it happen.
Man, I absolutely agree. And I mean, I know a lot of people who are based here in the US and they have the same mindset and they're thinking the same way about the continent and they want to play a role in Africa's development. So, yeah, I mean, let's keep chatting, let's keep talking. I certainly look forward to, reading more about your work because it's really important to have people like you who are, subject matter experts and, have studied these topics extensively. So thank you for all the work that you're doing and all the work that you will continue to do in the future.
Right. Thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity and the encouragement and the wonderful work that you are doing for Africa and for all of us and for humanity. I really appreciate it, and I'll stay in touch.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Michael. Michael was such a wonderful guest, and I hope that you all took so much away from all that he had to share. I'm certainly glad to see that things in China are getting a little bit better and back to normal. And for us living in the US, it looks like we still have a ways to go and kind of like a long road ahead. But I especially hope and pray that cases on the continent remain low and that our governments are able to really step up and meet the immediate needs of our people. Thanks for listening to Dear Diaspora. If you like what you hear, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes. You can find us on Instagram at Dear Diaspora or visit our website at deardiasporashow.com. Thank you and talk to you next week.